We have an amazing interview with Mark Moss. I just did an amazing introduction from my heart, and I stumbled on my words, and I wanted to repeat it because our guest is really a special person that has probably one of the best YouTube channels on the internet in macroeconomics. He talks about Bitcoin, gold, silver, business. He's crushed online internet marketing and entrepreneurship, and has really a lot of amazing things to say. He's got an awesome family life and just all around very successful, interesting person. And so I'm excited to have him on. But first, just hit the like button on either side if you are going to enjoy this interview, and let's dive right into it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jake. It's a great introduction, and I love talking to you. So excited for it.
So you were saying some really interesting things when we were off air, basically, and you were saying about how you believe that Bitcoin is something that you think can change the world. And that was a big statement, and I wasn't intending to start this way, but that was just a big statement. And so I wanted to kind of unpack that to start, and we'll also talk about gold, silver, macroeconomics. But what do you mean by that, especially in the context of right now in the world where there's so much weird things happening with elections and just this whole year with lockdowns, and now they're saying they want to do another round of lockdowns. So what do you mean by that statement?
Well, we're going to dive right into it, I guess. Well, let me say first off that you said that was a big statement, and actually you understated it. So you said that I said that I think Bitcoin can change the world. That's not actually what I said. What I said is Bitcoin is the only thing that gives me hope for the future. So it's a way bigger statement, actually. And so let me unpack that just for a minute. And like I said, we're diving into the deep end of the pool here really quickly. But if you understand macroeconomics and you understand, to understand the way the financial system works, you have to understand a lot of different subjects, right? You have to understand money, monetary history. You have to understand economics. You also have to understand things like philosophy. You also have to understand human action, like human intention, motivation, right? So there's a lot of stuff you have to understand. Now, if you dig in deep and you can realize that for 5,000 years, the whole world was on a gold system. Really, we hit a lot of prosperity from the 1400s, the 1800s, when the whole world got onto a standardized unit of account, like a standardized gold coin. And the reason why we hit that massive amount of flourishment is because people were able to specialize, and we had a good sound money. So I could specialize in what I was specializing in, and I could store my wealth over here. Well, fast forward to the early 1900s, the U.S. took over as the world reserves currency. It was pegged to the U.S. dollar per the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the tie. So basically the whole world came off of the gold standard in 1971. Now we can talk about all these little different dates, but this is kind of the big numbers. Now, if you look at what's happened in the world from 1971 till today, you can basically see that every problem that we've had really all goes back to the money. Now, there's an awesome website. It's called WTFhappened1971.com. And if anybody wants to understand more about what I'm saying, I would recommend go to that website. It's all just charts, and it shows you why the prison populations exploded, why the divorce rates exploded, why income inequality has exploded, and all these things happened right at 1971. So anyway, go check that out. So the problem that we have is, in addition, is imagine all the way through history, our wealth was in our land, it was in our goats, our cows, or it was in some gold that I had. And so I was afraid that this guy was going to come over and kill me and my family and take my goats. And then this village was going to come over and kill us, take our goats and our gold. And then we had kingdoms, and this kingdom was going to come take our gold. And this country was going to come take our assets. Well, what happens today when all my wealth is stored in an online blockchain and I have 12 words in my head? How can someone come and steal that wealth from me? I don't have to worry about someone stealing my gold or whatever, right? So that's one big shift. But here's the bigger shift, and here's why I say it's the only thing that gives me hope for humanity. Right now, we are moving rapidly into a totalitarian nightmare. If you look at what's happening in China today, they have almost total control right through the algorithms. We're growing up now with Facebook and Instagram, social media, and the algorithms are controlling what we think by showing us the information that they want. But even worse, what they're doing is they're locking us in our countries because they own us economically. So, for example, you mentioned I'm older. I'm old now. When I grew up, I had friends whose families had moved over from Iran. Families had moved over from South Africa, and they left those areas because of oppressive regimes. They fled for their lives from Afghanistan or Iran, and when they came, they had to leave every single penny behind. They couldn't get their money out of the banks. They couldn't bring their gold. They couldn't bring their real estate, and they came to America penniless. Okay. And what we're seeing is that's only getting worse and worse and worse, especially now the central banks are moving to central bank digital currencies, and that's programmable money, and they will own your whole life. Now, the problem is that if I don't like it in Iran, I should be able to move to a country that I like better. We win when there's competition. Competition provides better services, better products, and better prices. So if a country owns you and treats you like a tax cow, they're going to have their way with you. The only hope for the future is, you mentioned going into lockdowns and things like that. Well, if they can just lock you down and do what they will with you, then what are you going to do about it? But if I have a choice, if another country's like, hey, come over here, we'll give you freedom, we'll give you private property, like, why wouldn't I want to go there, right? Of course I would. But if I can't take any of my wealth with me, how can I do that? And that's been the problem forever, but it's all changed. Bitcoin gives us the ability to store our wealth, hold its value, keep it in a way that no government or any person or kingdom or whatever can come steal it from us. And it allows me to move to another country with my wealth. And never before have we ever seen that before. And what that will do, and the reason why I have hope for humanity, is because as the whole world is becoming more and more and more controlling, right, taking away our freedoms, trying to push us into this matrix type world, if we can get to a point where we can have nations competing for us, because now we can move freely with our wealth. There's a book called The Sovereign Individual. It's a great book, and it kind of explains this, and it was written back in like 89, I think. But I'll be able to move from country to country. Countries are competing, and that is what will give us freedom, liberty, countries competing for us. And so I believe that only through that competition it will ever achieve that. Otherwise, if there's no competition, we end up like the DMV. The government just treats you like crap, right? But with that competition, the only thing that allows that to happen is being able to move our wealth with Bitcoin.
Interesting. You had a lot of interesting things to say there. There's a lot of directions that I could go. One other thing that I was contemplating was, I think even people that don't like cryptocurrencies, I think even those people would agree that the blockchain is, that type of discovery is valuable in and of itself as well. And the other thing I was thinking about Bitcoin that is there's no reason we should have the archaic voting system that we have anyways. And it would be very easy to have some type of blockchain crypto thing. You couldn't get hacked. You couldn't have voter fraud. Both sides, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you could rest assured that your election wasn't being rigged. And so I think that's valuable too. But let me ask you, I kind of went right into that to just kind of set the scene, because that was a really interesting thing that you had to say. And so I wanted to hear what you thought about it. Where do you think we're at right now? I mean, what is your thoughts on, they're talking now about another round of lockdowns already happening most in the world. There still isn't more stimulus. So, I mean, before any of this happened, you already had, obviously, the vast amount of people hanging on by a thread, because that's just the way that our society has been shaped, because everyone lives off of credit cards now, and they've shoved this system down where most people are living paycheck to paycheck. I think like 75% of people or something like that. I could be wrong on those numbers, but it's a lot. And this was when people had jobs and they could express their right to be employed. And now, we had this terrible run and with the lockdowns and the effects on everybody globally. I mean, America's better than other places. I mean, think about some of these countries in the world that rely off tourism, and that's how the whole country survives. So they're talking about another round of lockdowns. There's all this talk. Are we going to get stimulus? Are we going to not get stimulus? What's going to happen? What do you think? Where do you think we're at right now? And if you had to predict, or you contemplate in your head when you're sitting there by yourself? Obviously, you're a really inquisitive guy and you've got all these dates and numbers, and you obviously spend a lot of time studying and thinking. What is your expectation of what to expect moving forward from today and through 2021 with the economy, with business, with the world?
Yeah, that's a really big question, and we'll dive into that. I'll try to move through it pretty quickly. And this is exactly what is consuming my mind right now. And as you said, right, I have a family. I have 2 daughters, and I think about this very selfishly. I've been following finance for over a dozen years selfishly to protect my family. Like, what am I going to do? And so I have been consumed for the last 8-9 months about what am I going to do about myself. So you asked, what do I think about myself? So first off, you mentioned the pandemic and the lockdowns and things like that. So for a lot of people, they think this is like random. It's a black swan event. It's random. It happened. It's going to pass. Everything's going to be okay. Unfortunately, I don't agree with that. So when you zoom out and you see what's been happening now, I grew up under the Cold War. So when I was in junior high and high school, Russia was still our enemy. The Berlin Wall was still there. Communism was still alive. And so I grew up under that. And they used to actually teach us that in school. And we used to understand what communism was and how bad it was. Today, they tell us it's good. So I grew up under that. And my parents were pretty involved. So I've seen this plan that's been unfolding for decades, and I've been watching what's happening. And when you understand the plan and you've been watching the game play out, then you understand where we're at today isn't random, and you also understand where it's going. So what's happening is not random. Now, let me give you a little bit of hard facts, and this is not conspiratorial. If you go to the website of the World Economic Forum, they're telling you that in the spring of next year, they're planning a great reset. It's actually on their website, worldeconomicforum.com/great reset. And they explain all this to you. Okay. So it's not conspiracy. Names of the people on there. We know it's Klaus Schwab, and we know it's Prince Charles, and we know it's Al Gore, and we know what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring the Great Reset down. I put out a tweet thread the other day because the World Economic Forum actually put out a tweet thread, and they said by 2030 you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's their tagline. By 2030,
and you'll have no privacy. That was the other words in that.
Yeah, there's right? They put out like 8 different things, but one of them, their overarching theme was you'll own by 2030 you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That was their tagline in every tweet. Then, of course, yeah, you're going to eat less meat. Really? Well, I like meat. Meat's healthy. Don't tell me what to eat. They said the world won't be the U.S. superpower. Really? That's isn't that like an attack on our sovereignty? Like the U.S. is okay with that? Like anyway, so I can go on and on all these tweets. But when you understand what's going on, and they said, Klaus Schwab, who runs the World Economic Forum, said, we are going to use COVID to reset the world's financial system. That's what he said. They're using COVID to reset the world's financial system. That's his quote. So now we can interpret what do you mean by that? I like to take it at face value. We also have new development that came out from the IMF about 2 weeks ago now, 2 or 3 weeks ago, where they're calling for a Bretton Woods 2. That's the quote. Mariana, whatever her name is, she said that we need a Bretton Woods 2. Okay, well, do you understand what Bretton Woods 1 is? You have to understand what Bretton Woods 1 is to understand what Bretton Woods 2 is. Basically, what the world, so we're focused on this presidential election race. This is like a pawn that we're talking about up here. We're talking about the people that run the world here. So what they're trying to do is by 2030, you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, per their quote. And so they're using this COVID to basically destroy the economies of the world so they can rebuild them. That's what they're saying. That's their words, not mine. And that is the big thing that's going on right now in the world. So destroying the economies, changing the money system, and changing the way the whole financial system works. And maybe you like that, maybe you don't. We can dig into that. But that's what I see, and that's what I spend my time focusing on, because I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to navigate this for me and my family. One of the reasons why I like to focus on money isn't so I can stockpile a bunch of money. One, I do a lot of serving trips, mission trips, things like that. But really, money for me is about having options. And so I focus on the money so I can have options, and I also have to kind of stay abreast of what's happening so I know what to do and where to go.
I agree with you. I think money is literally your only chance to have your real, not only constitutional rights, uh, but also your God given rights. And it's greatly understated because we've created a society that's demonized it without understanding that while your freedoms are literally being taken away from you, while all of this is occurring, you're going broke at the same time, which means you're literally going to be a slave that has to do what you need to do. Otherwise, you're not going to get your stipend. You're not going to be included in society, and you have to be included in society in order for you to get your whatever, your little stipend. And so I agree with you on everything you're saying. And I mean, you're right. I mean, it's before you and I had talked, I haven't been feeling that well about all of this. It's moving us towards that final grab that I dropped. The reason I really dropped out of college, I can't even say it all. I made this channel, this new one also, because I could say things that maybe they could get me in trouble on my main channel, and I didn't want to take the risk. But like, I dropped out because I listened to Alex Jones' documentary when I was 19 called Endgame that explained exactly what's happening with pandemic, move to digital currency, all the suppressing and censorship. But and I agree with you on everything you're saying, and it's both. It's scary to me. It's concerning to me. But you said money, you see it as a tool. So then let me ask you. So this is because I made this channel because I also want to try to freaking help people as much as I can. And so in the real sense of the word, instead of just going on into scary talk, when you say money is like the real freedom, can you tell me some of the biggest mistakes you think? I mean, you're a multi-millionaire. You've done really, really, really well for yourself. Like, what are the mistakes that people are making right now? And what are the things people need to be doing that are listening to this going, yeah, I agree with everything Mark and Jake are saying, but like, I don't have any money, or I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough to buy my freedom. And I recognize you guys are right. What should I do, Mark? Or what should I stop doing? I guess just to go into the stuff that'll help.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that. And my answer might be a little bit different than what you're expecting. So I have a business. My business, my YouTube channel is talking about finance. I talk about the financial system, as you already said. I talk about the Federal Reserve, stocks, gold, silver, Bitcoin, et cetera. My business is also helping people learn how to invest their money. But the answer to that question might be a little bit different because of my business is there. But the mistake that I see, and you mentioned that for people that maybe don't have a lot of money, what are they going to do? And the mistake that I see, the majority of people that come into my world to learn about investing and even join into my classes and my investing newsletters, the majority of those people I see coming in with the wrong idea. And so this is the problem that they're having, where they come in thinking, I'm going to be able to quit my job and be able to become a full-time investor. In 3 years from now, I'm going to be rich. In 5 years, I'll never have to worry about money again. That's not the case. So there's 3 ways I like to think about money. 1, we need to make it. 2, we need to grow it. And 3, we need to protect it and keep it. Now, the protecting and keeping it part is probably the most important, and people think that's ridiculous. If you haven't made the money, you don't understand how hard it is to keep it. But the problem is most people come into the wanting to grow the money phase, the second phase. But as you said, a lot of them are broke. They don't have the money. And so really the problem that I see people coming in wanting to learn about investing and become a full-time investor, they need to focus on wealth creation first. And so, the thing that they have wrong with that is understanding how wealth is actually created. And wealth is created by providing value to people, by solving problems. So I think that the majority of people need to focus on making more money first. And then once you've made that money, then you start to focus on, okay, how can I protect it from the overreaching hands of the government? How can I put it in a way where I can move around the world and keep my wealth with me? How can I take this wealth that I've built up and let it grow so it beats inflation? And so the investing piece is super important, and that's what I spend my life doing right now. But most people need to figure out the wealth creation part first.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it's a thing nobody talks about and nobody wants to hear. But think about it. You're right. It's like this is what changed my life too, because I read all those books that were like, here's how to budget and here's how to save. And like, here's how to like, even if it was a book about gold or crypto or whatever, but my problem was that I didn't have any money. And I listened to Grant Cardone and he said, your problem in life is you actually don't make enough money. That's your problem. And I was like, wow, it's true. I'm like, I need to focus on making more money. I need to first of all, well, then how do people do it? Well, they do it by owning a business normally or being involved somehow in profits or sales of another business. And I think you're right. It's the thing it's not being mentioned enough, but it's really the only way to protect, like you said. So let me ask you, how do you think that somebody listening that says, okay, yeah, you're right, I realize it. I have this job and maybe I don't like it, but now I'll keep it. And then I'll spend my spare time right now, maybe trying to develop a business or work with some friends on something or get a part-time sales job doing something. What would you say to somebody that's listening to us that says, Mark, like, okay, so how do I do it? How do I start to make some more money? I think it's like the shield like sword that actually protects you the most against the government is having a business, even more than gold or silver or Bitcoin or anything, in my opinion.
You said it perfectly. So it's interesting where these conversations can go. I know we were going to talk about investing in markets, and I can talk about that all day. But again, right, wealth creation is that most important part. Now, just as a quick side note, a couple of weeks ago, I was out in Phoenix, Arizona, hanging out with Robert Kiyosaki, and we went out to dinner, had a couple of bottles of wine, and I was on his Rich Dad radio show, and we were talking about the financial system. Obviously, we went to dinner, and over bottles of wine, we talked about business. So we talked about money and finance on the show. We talked about business afterwards, and it was him, myself, and another YouTube, George Gammon, and we were talking about this exact conversation. And we said how all these people come in thinking they want to be full-time investors, but they need to focus on wealth creation. And we mentioned how all three of us are full-time investors, but we're all still working, right? We're all still making money. And so that's the disconnect. Now, so anyway, you can talk about investing and what to do with that all day, but if you want to dive into that, that's great. So what I would say to answer that question specifically is, and actually I was just hanging out with a mutual friend of ours, Yaya Baker, the other day, and we had this exact conversation as well. And we both agreed that in order to make more money, you need to figure out how to provide more value. So right off the bat, school hasn't taught you that. It's like, I need to get more money. They need to pay me more. My boss needs to pay me more. Or they're greedy because they won't pay me more. Well, are you providing more value? For me, I've never thought like I need to go get a job. That thought has never crossed my mind ever. I just think, how can I make more money? It's a whole different thought process. So how do you do that? Let me give you tangible ways. The first thing is if you want to make more money, you need to get yourself as close as you can to the money supply. That sounds simple. Great. What's the money supply? Sales and marketing. That's where the money comes in. If I said, Jake, I'm going to bring you $1 million of new sales for your products this year. If I bring you $1 million of new sales, would you pay me $100,000 of that? What would you say?
I would pay you more.
You would pay me more. Exactly. So if I can bring you that, now how could I do that? Jake, I'm the best phone closer in the world. Let me take your leads and I'm going to close them on new products. Great. Oh, no, I don't like phone sales. Okay. And that's a skill that I can learn. There's plenty of people that are teaching how to do high dollar phone closing. So I can learn that skill. I can read books. I can take courses. I can figure it out on my own. Oh, I don't like phone sales. Okay, Jake, how about if I run your ads for you? Jake, I'll run your Facebook ads and I'm going to bring you a ton of business. I'm going to do it for free. But if I make you money, will you pay me some of it? Yes. What about your YouTube ads? What about if I write copy for you? What about if I do your video editing? Like, there's so many ways that I can provide value to you, to your money, by sales and marketing. So that's where I would say people should focus on. Again, we talked about kind of like this is the great equalizer. I can learn anything, meet anyone, do anything right here. So I could learn how to do phone sales. I could learn how to do Facebook or YouTube ads. I could learn how to do copywriting or video editing or Photoshop or whatever. I could learn it all here. I could reach out to you here and I could provide those services right here. And so I think you should learn high value skills that are around the money supply and then use those to provide value for others. Now, once you learn sales and marketing, you'll never go broke in your life because you're now the rainmaker. If I had to start all over again tomorrow and I had no contacts, no nothing, I could just go out to my main street in my town right here. I could walk business to business and walk into business. Hey, business. If I were to bring you new customers, would you give me money? They would say yes. I would go home. I'd set up Google pay-per-click campaigns, YouTube campaigns, Facebook campaigns. I would set up a blog. I would drive business to them, and I'd start making a bunch of money by first providing value to other people.
Yeah, hell yeah. You're right. I mean, it's really like the only real fighting technique you have in the world. I mean, what's one Bitcoin or 1 ounce of gold going to do for you if you can't make any, you can't live off one of it for your whole life unless they all go to some crazy price, but come on. So you're right. It's the thing that nobody realizes how important it is unless, like you said, you have that shift in the way that you're thinking about it, where it becomes a sense of urgency or priority. So do you think that the skills, if somebody's listening to this, the ones that are best to utilize are specifically sales and marketing or learning those that have to do with the internet?
Well, I would say, like I said, as close as you can get to the money supply. The more value I can provide you, the more money I'm worth, right? So again, if I can increase your revenue, I'm going to get a piece of that revenue. So as close as you can get to that. And then you have to figure out, obviously, what your own skills and interests are. Now, you also probably have to develop new skills and new interests, and that's okay.
So tell me the most interesting. George's super smart too. I interviewed that guy. I was like, man, that guy is impressive. He multimillionaire in his 30s. And so when you were with George and Robert and you guys were, what was you're obviously like a sponge, and both those guys, have done incredible things in life. What's the biggest things that you learned? Whether it had to do, you said the bulk of the conversation was about business. Like when you left and you were like, that was really interesting, or this thing, Robert, you're sitting around two really, really, really smart people, and you're somebody that's really good at studying. So what'd you take out of that?
Yeah, well, so Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, I told you earlier, is probably one of the 2 most influential books of my life. And a lot of people say it's too surface, it's too high level, there's not enough tactical stuff in there. But I don't think that's true. What it did is it opened up my mind, and it allowed me now to go learn new things. So probably the most important thing, at least my own personal takeaway, was Robert Kiyosaki's a legend. I mean, you can say what you will about him, but you can't take away the fact that he is almost a household name. He's made a ton of money. He's got multiple New York Times bestseller books. And anyway, so what I personally learned from him was he talks about the cash flow quadrant. And if you don't know what that is, you should go read the book. But he redefined that a little bit. So the cash flow quadrant is basically you have an employee, a small business owner, and an investor. And so those are the 4 areas that you can make money in life. So I can make it as an employee, I can make it as a small business owner, I can make it as a business owner, or I can make it as an investor. The goal is to try to move over to the B&I side, not be the employee, not be the small business owner, but be the business owner or the investor. So you make your money from the business and you move it from the B quadrant and you move it to the I quadrant. So he spelled this out 25 years ago, exactly what I'm saying. Focus on making money, then focus on growing it. So he says, make it from the B quadrant and put it to the I quadrant. But what he said is he redefined the B quadrant when I was with him. And what he said is that the business owns assets. That's what the business is. The business owns assets, and those assets are what makes me money. So through Robert Kiyosaki, he has Robert Kiyosaki, he has Rich Dad Poor Dad, he has the cash flow game. He licenses those out. He said he has over 50 licenses. So people license his name to write emails. People license his name to write books. People license his name, and he just gets paid for doing nothing because he owns the asset. He owns the brand. And so my big takeaway was trying to transition my business into where I own. And obviously I know about owning assets. I own Bitcoin, I own gold, I own real estate, et cetera. But what about my own IP, my own intellectual property? What brand do I have that people could leverage or license at some point? And so that is the transition I'm going to be making over the next year, is trying to establish some brands. So I teach something, my methodology is called the 4-pillar blueprint. I believe it's the easiest way to invest. You focus on investing in 4 areas, the 4 pillars: invest for growth, invest for cash flow. Cash should be one of your pillars. And then you have chaos hedge insurance. And so I'm going to build that out. I'm going to turn that more into a brand. I mean, I already do. I have thousands of people already in that, but I'm going to work on doing that. I'm also going to work on a book as well. So that was my big takeaway, I guess, building assets that can be leveraged.
Interesting. So you're talking about, it made you think in a way of building things that are more independent from Mark Moss himself, so that they can go, whether you're awake or asleep, or someone else can go run the gig. Interesting.
That's exactly right. And what happened to Robert? So just recently, Peter Schiff was the target of a takedown interview. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
And so Peter Schiff got targeted by was it ABC Australia?
It was 60 Minutes Australia.
60 Minutes Australia, yeah. So Robert Kiyosaki was actually the target of the same attack, I think, by the same group in Australia as well. And this was 25 years ago or whatever. And at the time, this was before Rich Dad Poor Dad book. This was before the Cash Flow Game. And they were doing seminars all throughout Australia, teaching people how to buy properties, rent them out, use the rental income, buy more properties. And they got a hit piece on them, said they were a cult and all these things. And they were so distraught, it ruined their business. They were mentally broken down. And he thought, what he called it is, someone taught him, he needs an artifact. That's what he calls it, an artifact, which is an object, a game, an asset. So he created the game. So he took all the lessons they were teaching through the seminars and put it into a game, cash flow. And he said, nobody can argue with an artifact. It is what it is. They can twist my words and say I was saying something or doing something I wasn't doing, but you can't argue with a game, with an artifact. And so that's exactly right. The artifact, or what he calls it, right? So that's the game, that's the book, et cetera. Something that stands alone.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess one day that will transition for me. But
you said you've written multiple books.
Yeah, but they don't sound like Robert Kiyosaki. I mean, I'm not like pulling in like 10 million bucks a year from my books still that I wrote 10 years ago, or whatever. But what did change my life though was, I guess maybe an evolution step before that, was moving from working everything per hour to either having other people do the work for me and I get a cut off of it, like hiring other people, having other people do different gigs, and then moving to products instead of per hour consulting or per hour speeches and everything. Because that did open me a door to, I guess, like the initial level of like more exponential income, because there was more leverage and more scale to it. And I guess maybe when you talk about those different quadrants, like moving from self-employed to small business, the difference for me, and maybe for you, and maybe something, if you agree, that might be good for a listener to consider too, is how you can, whatever you're selling or whatever you're offering as a service or skill, either to be involved in the profits or moving to something that allows you more leverage, because there's a certain time limit. Do you think a time limit in a day for your services? So if there's more scalability or leverage built into the product or service you're offering, then it's something that is good to explore. And it changed my life. My income went up exponentially when I shifted how I got paid and how I offered my value. Did that happen to you? And do you think that that's an important step?
Yeah, definitely. So it's moving from the employee to the small business owner, and then from the small business owner to the business owner. And the business owner, self-employed is someone who's the tactician, right? They're in the business doing the work. The business owner then moves to having other people do the work, and they're working on the business, not in the business. But yeah, definitely, you're absolutely right. Not
in it.
Exactly. And we could keep going into these conversations all day. But yeah, obviously, trying to identify what Naval says is that you need to work on everything that's creative, and if it's not creative, someone else should be doing it.
Do you think so? That's so important too, because I almost feel like we're all headed for this reset, right? We're all headed for like this digital currency, and whatever happens, if there's more lockdowns and that's the future, like we're headed towards this dystopia that many people that were called conspiracy theorists that talked about this 10 or 15 years ago, it's really happening. And I think there's a tendency for people that are awake, to get really sucked into the daily events, and then it drains all our energy from our creative tasks that can make us the money to ensure our freedom. Do you think that that's a true statement?
Yeah, definitely is. So, especially with politics, right? So, if and you probably understand this because you dig into the personal development side, but like if you understand how the human body works and like dopamine in our brain, right? So like we get super addicted to dopamine, and one of the most addictive things is obviously social media is addictive, but also engaging in topics around politics and things that really trigger that kind of emotion gives us massive amounts of dopamine, and we kind of get addicted to it. And not only do we get addicted to it, we're not focusing on other higher value tasks, like you said. It actually takes away our ability to focus on those deeper tasks. So it distracts us, but two, it even prohibits us or makes it difficult for us to do those things.
Yeah, I wish everybody knew that. So what do you think's about to happen? So you think we're just headed right now into like freaking, March 2020 World Economic Forum and they're just going to be like, all right, give us your cash. We're moving it. Like, what do you think's going to happen in 2021?
Yeah. So let's jump back into the money side. So first off, I would say you mentioned, I think you said you read something 15 years ago or whatever, and it's all coming true.
It was Alex Jones's documentary Endgame. Okay.
So you watched that. And so again, remember I talked about, I've been watching this play out for 20 years as well. Look, go back and read the book 1984.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all predicted. Like this is all a big plan. Everyone knew this is what was going to happen. This is not random. So anyway, back to that. So where unfortunately it looks like things are going. Now, first of all, after we talk about this, let's talk about what we can do about it, because the future is not set. I don't believe I'm a victim. The future is for me to create. And
that's why I wanted to go into all that other shit. Pardon me for interrupting, but that's why I wanted to go into all that other before, because it is takeaways and values, and it's not just like a doomsday. So someone can leave and be like, "All right, I got to start my business." And like you're in the education business, and you know so much about business that I don't normally talk, but I thought that'd be a good thing for people to leave with a takeaway. Pardon me interrupting.
So we'll make sure we hit on that because we want to give people hope. But unfortunately, where things are going right now, China rolled out their central bank digital currency. Was it October 12th? So a month ago, it hit the public. We know that the Federal Reserve in the U.S. here is rolling out their CBDC pretty soon. We know that they're already working on it with MIT. We know it was already written into law in the stimulus bill that was put together during the pandemic. I think it's January 1st of next year. All the banks are required to support digital wallets to roll that digital currency out. So it's happening. It's happening really quick. All the other countries around the world are rolling out CBDCs as well. The thing with the CBDC, it's a central bank digital currency. Now, first of all, 90% of our money is already digital anyway, right? Everyone's using Visa cards and debit cards and wire transfers, and it's all online. So it's all digital anyway. But the difference of this CBDC is two big differences. So the first big difference is it's programmable money. Okay. So right now, we use debit cards, Visa cards, whatever. And yes, the government can go freeze that account if they want, but it's difficult. The CBDC digital currency is programmable money. So for example, they're going to give you your stipend, as you called it, your dividend, your stimulus, your UBI, whatever it is. So they're going to give you $1,200. Their goal, if you understand economics, is Keynesian economics, is so we have to spend our way back to prosperity. So they need people to spend money. And what happened is when they gave that stimulus, I was just looking at some charts this morning. When they gave that stimulus money, it didn't actually stimulate the economy. Most people saved it. And that's not what they want, because they need people out there spending. So they could, for example, they could say, hey, here's your $1,200. If you don't spend it within a week, it comes back to us. oh, and by the way, you can only spend it for this, this, and this, but you can't spend it for this, this, and this. So for example, a lot of people got their stimulus money and then put it into Robinhood. And that was one of the big bumps that we saw in the stock market, the rise of the Robinhood traders. So they could say, hey, here's $1,200. You can't save it and you can't invest it. You can only spend it. So that'd be one way to do that. Hey, you can't give money to these and these and these causes. You can't give it to the conservative cause. You can only give it to Democrat causes or whatever. So they could do all that kind of stuff. That's pretty scary. So that's a way to control the people through the money. But what's even bigger and even scarier to me is what I mentioned earlier with what the IMF is. And they called, again, it's on their website. You can go look this up. They called for a Bretton Woods 2 moment. And so if you understand what that means, so the IMF, in 1944, the world agreed to come under this Bretton Woods agreement. And basically what the Bretton Woods agreement is that the United States would hold all the gold and would peg the dollar to gold. And then all the countries around the world would peg their currency to the dollar. So in a sense, all currencies were pegged to gold, basically. And so that was an agreement. The whole world agreed. And under that, in 1944, under that agreement was created the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. It was the bank above all the banks. So all the countries had central banks, and then you had the IMF, which is the central bank above that. Well, they're calling, in 1971, when the gold standard was severed, all the countries, all the central banks basically went and started doing their own thing. Now we have currency wars and countries are racing to devalue their currencies and do all these things. They're calling for a Bretton Woods 2. So just like Bretton Woods 1, the whole world coming back and agreeing on a single money again. That's what Bretton Woods 2 is. And so the IMF all of a sudden realized, shoot, all these countries are racing to create their own central bank digital currencies, their own CBDCs. We need to have our CBDC. So we're going to come out with our own CBDC, and we're going to beat all of them to the game. And the IMF will push the central bank digital currency directly to the people, bypassing all the levels of banking and policy. So right now, the Federal Reserve or each central bank in each country does what they think is best for their own country. And we have laws and legislation, and people make laws, and Senate says, no, you can't spend that much. And they say, yes, we want to spend that much. Well, basically what we're seeing is the bankers want to cut out all the government and basically rule the world. So they'll create the money at the IMF, push it directly to the people, and that just bypasses all of government.
I never thought of that last part where you said that basically the central banks want to beat the governments to it so that they basically control the world. So do you think that they already have that central bank currency ready?
It's not ready, but it's being ready. I mean, it'll be ready quickly. I mean, you can make a new digital currency pretty quickly. I mean, obviously there's a lot of loopholes and regulations and bureaucracy that they have to go through, but they announce it all the time, how fast they're moving towards that. Christine Lagarde was just talking about it, I think, yesterday. So it's coming together pretty quickly. I would imagine by next year, it'll be all in place. Like I said, China already launched theirs October 12th. So we don't have due dates on all this stuff, but it's happening. It's happening really quickly. It was, I believe it was Mayor Rothschild back, 200 years ago. He said, I care, give me control over a nation's money. I care not who makes their law. Right. And so that is, that's been basically what's been pushing all of this for 200 years. And so that's exactly where we're at. The IMF says, we don't care about those individual countries and their laws. We're going to create the money. And so it's a banking takeover of the world. And then when you think about, so put that together with what we were talking about earlier with the World Economic Forum. So when you look at the hierarchy of the world, you have the IMF, you have the World Economic Forum, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, the UN. That's who's controlling the world, right? And so there's these, 20 guys in a room that basically control everything. Now, when you put what the IMF is doing together with what the World Economic Forum is doing, and just kind of look, again, go to their websites and just read what they say. And you can interpret it however you will. But the World Economic Forum says that by 2030, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Well, if we don't own anything, who owns it? Who owns it? The banker.
Well, the banks would.
The bankers own everything. They own the whole world. And that's their goal, right? They want to take over the world. And so, again, go look this up on the IMF's website. So what they said is that the coronavirus pandemic This was about 3 weeks ago. It's on their website. They said that the coronavirus pandemic wiped out about 5% of global GDP. I think it was about 14 or 15 trillion dollars. Now, most of these countries can't sustain that. The U.S. prints more dollars, of course. Most of the countries can't sustain that, right? They're losing hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars. They're going broke and bankrupt. So what the IMF is doing is they've, through the World Health Organization, they've made every country shut down. Those countries have now lost combined $15 trillion of gross domestic product. They're broke. They can't survive. What the IMF is doing now, as we speak, I think 26, 27 countries already, they're giving them loans. Hundreds of billions of dollars of loans. So they crush the economy, the country goes broke, they give them loans, and they call them, I don't remember exactly what they call it, but special loan forgiveness programs or whatever. So, hey, we took away your money, but don't worry, we'll loan you more. And by the way, we're going to write it off and forgive it as long as you do this, this, and this for us.
So right now we're in the process of the biggest finesse of global assets ever.
It's a wealth transfer. It's the final wealth transfer, right? They're over the next 10 years, their goal, if we don't do something to stop them, over the next 10 years, their goal is to transfer all the wealth of the world into the hands of the bankers.
So that's what you think they mean when they say by 2030 you'll own nothing. What they're really saying is we're going to keep having everyone go broke and we're going to keep buying everything out in the world. That's how you interpret it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and well, they're already doing it. So already as we speak, like I said, I think the IMF's already extended loans out to 26, 27 countries, somewhere in that range. So they're already doing it. They've already crushed the world economies. People have already, now we can argue, was this accidental? Was it intentional? Again, I think if you zoom out and you look at it with a long enough lens, you'll see that it's kind of been progressive.
I mean, I can't, maybe someone could argue with it. I mean, to be honest, it's so obvious if you go back.
Well, it's on their website. I mean, it's on they're not hiding behind anything. That's why I keep saying, go to their website, go to the website, go to the website. Right. This isn't like a conspiratorial thing. Conspiratorial is like 2 or more people agreeing in secret to do something. This isn't in secret. It's on their website. They have the pictures of the people are on there. So anyway, yeah, that's what they're doing. They've crushed the economy. Now, Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum says they're using COVID to do this. He didn't say we caused COVID. He didn't say that. So we could argue, was it man-made or was it accidental? And I don't even want to have that conversation because it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is they are using it for this purpose. And per the World Economic Forum, they said the U.S. won't be the world superpower. So what they're trying to do is, instead of what I would like to do, is I would love to bring all humanity up. That's my goal. I want to elevate everybody. I want everybody to do good. But that's not what they want. They want to crush the U.S. to bring it down to the level of the rest of the world. And so that's a big difference. And if you look at, really what that ideology is. And that ideology, again, is not compartmentalized. So the World Economic Forum is saying that we also have this strong, steady push to socialism and Marxism. The head of the BLM says that they are trained Marxists. We know this, right? We know that socialism, Marxism, basically the same thing. We know that per that ideology, private property is wrong. That's what Marxism says. Private property is evil. So one, that ideology says private property is evil. 2, the World Economic Forum says you're not going to own anything. I mean, look where this is going. I mean, if we can't paint these numbers together, I don't know what you're doing.
I don't know what you're doing. I was trying to think of something funny for what someone could be doing, but I couldn't even think of something that funny. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's for the last 10 years I've known all this stuff. I mean, for the last 10 years, and I used it. That's why I got into personal development industry, because I was so angry and upset and I felt really hopeless, like, where it was going, basically one world government through a one world digital currency. And I used it as motivation to build my business and everything. And like I told you, it's kind of circled back around to, I want to talk about this stuff more and starting this channel and everything like that. So I'm with you on everything you're saying. How do you think they crush the United States? when you say they want to crush the United States? I mean, what do you think's next in the United States? We've got, the dollar, a lot of people think that, it'll stay strong for a long time. We still don't have stimulus. Now I'm starting to wonder, are they just going to choke everybody out right now and like not give anyone, these people?
I think they'll give the stimulus. Obviously we have this whole election fraud thing going on, so they've got to figure that out. But the stimulus is going to come. It might not come till the first of next year, but it's going to come. Their goal is to get everybody on stimulus.
So their goal is for middle class. I call myself like middle class. Like I've got over a net worth of $1 million in my 20s, but like that's not a lot of money. And like, I'd even like Robert Kiyosaki is like rich, and like you're like upper middle class. I mean, I know statistically we're in the 1%, but like I know $1 million for what's happening is not that
what
much
it used
money.
To be.
No way.
When I was a kid, $1 million was like you could live forever on $1 million. Today, $1 million. Well, I live in California. You make $1 million in a year, you end up with 500,000 or 400,000. So if I make $1 million in California, I end up with 400 grand. Now, where I live in my neighborhood, homes are $3 million. You can't live in a $3 million home on 400 grand.
No, you
can't. My insurance just for my family of four is $28,000 a year. Like, how do you live on 400 grand a year? Like, you're not that rich. Now, if I lived in Kansas on 400 grand, I'd live much better than Southern California. But $1 million, I mean, I know for people that only make 100 grand or 50 grand, they think it's a lot of money, but 400 grand, I mean, it's not a whole lot to live in California. Anyway, so how does it play out? So, I don't believe in I don't believe that there's 5 guys in a room and they're calling the shots. I mean, there's multiple players here. There's multiple directions. Obviously, we just kind of talked about, BLM and the Marxism that's moving through the left with, the AOC and Bernie Sanders in that camp. And then we have the IMF and what they're trying to do. What I see in the US, though, is that we're in massive debt. We have several $100 trillion of unfunded liability. So we have the largest segment of the population right now, the baby boomers are all retiring, and they're owed a lot of money through Social Security, through Medicare, through pensions, et cetera. A lot of money, hundreds of trillions of dollars. How do we pay for that? How can we afford to pay for that? At the same time, if Biden ends up winning this thing, his economic team, again, AOC and all them, they want to do this Green New Deal. He calls it the Biden deal, whatever it is. They want to spend between 30 to 90 trillion on renewable energy. Where do you get 30 to 90 trillion dollars? Like, where does that come from? How do we get $90 trillion to spend on that and come up with $200 to $300 trillion of unfunded liabilities? How does that work? It doesn't.
You got to be smoking crack with Hunter to figure that one out.
So to put that into perspective, the U.S. spends about 3 to 4 trillion a year right now. That's like our budget, 3 to 4 trillion. We have about a $2 trillion deficit this year, meaning we're about 2 trillion short of the 4 trillion. So how do you go spend 300 trillion? Like, you don't, right? So, I mean, people just need to kind of think that through. So basically, the dollar, I mean, there's a bunch of nuances in here, but the dollar, I do believe that the dollar is the best currency in the world. It's losing its power. I mean, it was used in 90% of transactions. Today it's down about 50 to 60% of global transactions. So it's losing its power. We have China, Turkey, Russia, Iran moving to do business outside of the dollar. So it's losing, but it's still the best currency out there. And I think as all the other currencies fall further, the dollar holds up against that. It doesn't last forever. So they're going to continue to print more money. The government is basically stuck now. If they don't continue to pump in money and give the stimulus, as you're saying, if they don't do that, the system's done. Like we'll like if they don't keep injecting money, like we'll die tomorrow. like literally, like, right. We're living off credit cards. Like if you take away the credit card, like we're done, like right. Tomorrow. So they have no choice. Their only choice is to go till they blow. And so what's happening is each new dollar they create, it's the law of diminishing returns. So each new dollar does less and less and less and less and less. And eventually it does nothing. And so we're spending, $2 to get $1 of economic growth. Why would we do that? That doesn't make any sense. Why not just send the money out to the people? Well, you do that, and then all of a sudden we have massive inflation. So we're stuck in this really difficult situation where basically the Fed, the U.S. government, the Fed, Federal Reserve has no choice but to continue printing money. It's continuing to have diminishing returns, and eventually it just fails altogether.
God, this is such a good interview. It's just fantastic. So I didn't tell you too. Just a quick side note. I just moved out of California 2 weeks ago. It was all my business, and I just left because of that. So I follow everything you said on all that. But let me ask you on inflation. Then it's always something that I wonder. There's still a lot of people that listen to what you say, and they say, "Well, where's the inflation? We'll just print more." I mean, we're not. There's the camp that says we're going to have a hyperinflation, like Weimar Germany, where you're going to like have wheelbarrows of cash walking around to like buy soda or whatever. And like, there's that camp of people that say we're going to have hyperinflation like that, and it'll cost you 100,000 United States dollars to go to dinner. And then there's the other camp that says we're going to have like this massive deflationary thing and the dollar is going to be king forever. And then there's the other people that say, well, if all of this is true, Mark, if all of this is true, why don't we have inflation? And you could argue, with things already expensive. Well, why aren't they more? Why aren't we getting inflation? Why aren't we getting inflation? And then you talked about how you said when you keep the money in the financial assets, it's prevented some price inflation, a lot of price inflation. But if you give it to people directly, you're going to have more actual price inflation. Where do you fall, and what do you think about inflation? Do you think that they're going to not really give people much money because they know if they do, it'll cause inflation, so they'll stop giving money people directly? Do you think we ever get this significant inflation that the many people have talked about? What do you think happens? So that's the $1 million question. That's those are interviews I typically have as well. Inflation or deflation? What I would say is that it's both. So some things are inflated and some things are deflating at the same time. Huh. So I don't think you just look at, say, inflation or deflation. Now, I tweeted last night, I'm looking at the tweet right now. It says the Fed says they can't get inflation. So the Fed is saying they're not getting inflation. But don't look, because food prices in the CPI is what the Fed uses to measure inflation. But don't look, because food prices in the CPI rose 3.9% in the last 12 months. The prices of corn, soybeans, rice, et cetera, are at a 4-year high. The agricultural index is up 22% in the past 6 months. Now, food prices are almost 15% of the CPI. So the index is up 22%. Like, inflation is there. And like, again, I'm old, but like, it wasn't that long ago. I can go to lunch for $5. $5 would get me a sandwich and some chips and a drink. Today, that's $12. I mean, and I don't think the Fed tells us they can't get inflation. I don't think any person living in the real world that pays for their actual goods doesn't. I don't think anyone believes that. I mean, look how much food prices have gone up. They're gone up crazy. Like I said, I used to go to lunch for $5. It's $12 today. I used to go to dinner for $15. It's $30 today. You go to the grocery store, steaks up, milks. I mean, it's all up. Everything's up. Homes in my neighborhood are up 30% in the last 16 months, 18 months. Like, what's come down? Stocks are at all-time highs. Gold's at all-time highs. Bitcoin's at all-time high. What's not at an all-time high right now? So who's going to say there's no inflation? The Fed. The Fed says there's no inflation. But who else is saying that? Now to answer the next question, which is, what are we going to see, inflation or deflation? So we have, hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt out there, and that debt is going to be defaulted on. So it's much easier to lose $1 billion. I could default on a loan. Sorry, I can't pay it anymore. And that $1 billion is gone, deflation. It's much easier to do that than to create $1 billion, to inflate it back up. Obviously, they can just push the button on the keyboard, but it doesn't really work like that. If you understand we can get into how the Fed creates money, but that's not even how it works. So they're not able to get the inflation into the system right now. Like I said, we can talk about that, but it's real easy to see $100 trillion default and just go out of the system, a couple of bankruptcies and it's gone.
So I think deflation is the most likely scenario. And I think most people I talk to, including myself, we don't like to give predictions, but rather we talk about probabilities. So I would say that maybe there's a 65% chance, in my estimation, the probability that we next year will see a massive deflation, potentially up to 60 to 80% drop. I give that the higher probability. I give a lower probability, maybe a 15% probability that maybe we just see things double or triple from here and we don't see the drop.
Okay, so go ahead.
I was gonna say, and it really comes down. So the problem is like we can understand market cycles. We can understand debt levels and debt to income and how they can be paid back. And we can understand that and then we can help predict. What we don't know, and the reason why this is anybody's guess, is because there's 12 guys in a room in New York that are deciding what they're going to do. And maybe they're going to print $40 trillion and pump it into the market tomorrow. Maybe they're going to pay every single person's mortgage off tomorrow. I don't know. They could literally do that. So there's that, so that's why I give that a lower probability. But the higher probability is natural market forces will prevail.
So when you say natural market forces and you say, the potential, you said 65% probability that there's a 60 to 80% drop. So when you say, quote, 60 to 80% drop, are you saying in stock prices, in the S&P 500, and this includes all assets, Bitcoin, gold, silver, you're saying you think a massive bust like
not
one
all
more
assets,
sell-off?
not all assets, but the market. So the stocks and bonds.
So you think kind of like the March sell-off that happened, you think something like that, maybe even worse?
Way worse. Yeah. So if you look at,
go ahead, please.
If you look at the 1929 crash, you look at the 2008 crash, what typically happens is you have about a 40 to 50% drop, then you have a 50% retrace, and then you have another drop. So that's typically what happens. If you go back and study the crash of 29 or 2008. And so that's the way the market cycles work. And so we're in that bounce. The bounce has exceeded. And a lot of that's because in 2008, we printed 800 billion of TARP. It was about $1 trillion of stimulus. We did 6 trillion. So the bounce was a lot higher this time, but the mark, again, that's what we should expect based off the other crashes, that we had the bounce and we'll probably have another crash down. We're still in what's called like a megaphone pattern. So that, and again, that's just, and again, natural market, that's what it tells us we should have, but they could just print, like I said, they could print 20 trillion and pump it in the market. We don't know.
Yeah. The printing 20 trillion and pumping it to market is an easier one to contemplate. That's why I'm asking more questions on your views on the deflationary side. So then I guess my next question is, if you think that's going to happen, I guess there's two questions out of that. Is one is knowing that you think there's a higher probability personally, are you not invested into anything right now and you're holding more in cash than you would in Bitcoin, mining stocks, whatever? You're in more just US dollar cash? And then the second fold of it is, if that happens, do you believe it's a quick bounce where they come in and say, all right, we got 100 trillion zillion dollars, and it's kind of like March where it was like down and everyone's like, oh my God, is the world ending? And then pretty quickly things just started catapulting back up. Bitcoin was down to like 3,600. Gold was down far. Silver was down to like, I don't know, whatever it was, $12 or some crap like that. But then things bounce quick. So I guess number one is, if you think that probability is high, how much are you invested percentage wise? And number two, do you think it's a quick, painful thing or a long, drawn out thing?
So I would say, we'll start with the first question. So what am I doing? So my newsletter I write is called the Tactical Asset Report. And I call it that because we need to be tactically managing our portfolio right now. The days of 60-40 and just hold it forever, in my opinion, that's gone. Like, don't do that. 60-40s don't work. That would be like 60% stocks, 40% bonds. That just doesn't work. And really, it hasn't worked. It's worked since the 80s, but if you go back earlier in time, it hasn't always worked. And now is not the time to be holding through the dip, especially if your time frame, your time horizon is 15 years or less. So again, if you look at the 29 crash, the 2008 crash, in 2008, stocks dropped, 50, I think it was about 50%. And it took, I think, 7 years to get back to where it had dropped from its previous high. So that was a 7-year hold. Now that was assuming that you held all the way through. Probably most people sold out and then they bought back in higher. But that would take 7 years to get through that. In other dips, we've seen it take up to 15 years to get back to its previous high. So if you don't have at least 15 years, you probably don't want to weather that dip. But I also think that, again, the fact that we have diminishing returns, the fact that we have way too many liabilities, the fact that the IMF is trying to take over the world, I don't know if we'll get back to the previous all-time high ever. So for me, I'm not going to be willing to hold through that 80%, 60% drawdown. No way. Why would I? One, even if it does get back in 15 years, I don't want to wait 15 years. And two, I don't think it really has a chance of getting back to new all-time highs. Now, let me clarify one thing though, okay? People need to understand that there's really two different ways to look at this. So everyone, most of our markets, at least in the US, we're focused on everything in US dollar terms. So could stocks get back up to their previous all-time highs in US dollar prices? Yes, they could. But it's not about US dollar prices, it's about purchasing power. How many dollars how much assets will those dollars buy? So let me give you an example. People think that home prices have gone way up. Home prices used to be worth median was $50,000. Today the median is $300,000. Look how much home prices have gone up. Well, not really. The value of the dollars went down. So it takes more dollars to buy those homes today. So the homes didn't go up. And how do I know that? Well, we look at it in terms of purchasing power. So for example, and I'm just throwing numbers off the top of my head, but let's say that in 1950, the median home price was $50,000 and it was going to take, I don't even know, 20, 30 ounces of gold to buy that, or 50 barrels of oil to buy that, or so many bushels of wheat to buy that. So you compare it against multiple things. Let's look at it priced in dollars. Let's look at it priced in gold. Let's look at it priced in oil. Let's look at it priced in wheat. Now today, the median home price is $300,000. Okay, it went way up in dollars terms from 50 to 300, but how many ounces of gold? How many barrels of oil? How many bushels of wheat, right? And all of a sudden, when you start looking at it in gold prices, you realize it hasn't changed that much. So we have to think about things in purchasing power, right? My dollars used to be $5 for lunch, it's $12 today. So just because we may see the stock market go back up in dollar terms, doesn't mean it got back up in purchasing power. So even though it got back to US dollars, those dollars buy less. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
So I think we need to be tactically managing our portfolio. I don't think it gets back up. Now, what am I doing about it? Yes, I'm still in the markets. I've shifted to more conservative, meaning I don't have as much exposure to the markets. I have a lot more exposure to cash. So I've limited my exposure there, but we don't know how far this market can go. Like I said, there is a chance that it just keeps going. I give it a smaller chance. And so I want to stay in that market. So on my gold miners, for example, on some of the stocks that most of my stocks I'm doing are either shorter term kind of trade type deals, swing trades, options. So I'm limiting my exposure. My gold miners, I'm allowing those to run long. I think that's going to be the trade of the decade. But I run with trailing stops on that. So it runs. At some point, it turns down. I set a 10, 20% trailing stop on that, depending on what the asset is and the volatility there. It drops 20%, closes me out. I take my profit and I go home. So I'm tactically managing things, not trading. I don't believe in trading. I don't advocate for the trading. I definitely don't do that. But I'm managing. I'm watching. I'm paying attention. I'm seeing what's happening. I'm keeping my stops in place. And when the market turns, I'll cash out and I'll take my chips and go home.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I was just curious because obviously nobody knows what's going to happen. There's the melt up crowd that thinks we have a little bit more room and nobody really knows. But I ask more on the deflation side because I think I'm
in the melt up camp. I think we still have melt up to go. And then again, my 65% probability is we have this melt up that continues for a little bit longer, and then probably sometime next year we have the massive deflation.
Yeah, I'm in everything. Like I'm in mining stocks, I'm in gold, I'm in silver, I'm in Bitcoin, and I do have some cash too. But like I'm in, and that's why I was just curious.
But what you just said though, right? You're in gold, silver, Bitcoin, and cash. So those are hard assets. Those are outside of the financial system. So I'm talking about the financial system. I'm talking about stocks and bonds.
Okay,
right?
yeah. I mean, I own mining stocks too. I guess.
But mining stocks are still based off of the gold in the ground.
Got it.
Right. So, for example, in 2008, we saw the stocks drop 50%, gold dropped 25%. But that only is part of the picture. The real picture is that it took 7 years for stocks to get back to its previous high. It took 6 months for gold to get to.
Okay, that's a really good distinction then, because when I was asking that, I was going from the premise of like when everything sold off in March and April, obviously gold did, silver did, mining stocks did, Bitcoin did.
But it only dipped a little bit. And it recovered really fast.
And it recovered faster. That's what I was saying. That's a really important distinction. I'm glad you made that. Now I can understand everything you're saying.
Let me add to that. So it's the response to the crash that then pushes gold and Bitcoin up.
Got it.
And that's why gold and Bitcoin, they did sell off, because when the markets crash, everyone's rushing for liquidity. And so they're going to sell whatever's liquid, which is their gold and Bitcoin, because they don't have any debt onto them, right? So they'll sell those, get their cash. But it's the response to the crash, the Fed's injection of money, that then pushes gold and Bitcoin back up. Now, so now that we've clarified that, back to what I think, the higher probability of this deflationary thing happening. And I said I wouldn't want to hold the drawdown of stocks and bonds, and I wouldn't want to hold the drawdown or wait for it to come back. But in gold, I think it might be worth holding through the dip.
Okay.
I think the dip would be much less severe, at least half of the stock dip, and the response to it will then push gold back up higher. So I was talking about stocks and bonds, financial stuff.
Got it.
Hard assets, gold, silver, Bitcoin, I think is different and probably worth holding through the dip.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I asked that, and I guess I should have made a better distinction, but I asked that because, you're right. It did dip. They all did dip less, but they still did dip. But I'm under the premise that I definitely think we could have another huge sell-off, especially if you go back to what we said earlier, and like the whole plan is to buy out the world. I mean, it makes sense to squeeze out one last group of people, if you're going back to the larger scheme of things, and you were really an evil person that thought like that. But like you said, that's a really interesting 7 years for stocks to return, but only 6 months for gold. And then I saw what happened in March and April, where I was like, geez, this rebounded so fast. I'm not even worried if it happens again, because I know it'll rebound really fast when it does.
And not only did gold rebound in 6 months, but it went from 680 to almost 2,000.
Yeah.
So it didn't just rebound; it shot up like a rocket ship.
Yeah.
And that was on about $1 trillion of stimulus. Today we have $6 trillion of stimulus with another $3 trillion teed up right now. So just on the same size move of 2008, it would push gold up to over $4,000. But we didn't have the same size move. We had a 6 times move. So what could that do to gold potentially? And we're already seeing it happen in Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing it in mining stocks. They've done quite well as well. But I guess that's a really important distinction. And I guess that's why I'm not afraid of anything selling off again. I'm like, oh, should I be in cash? Should I not be in cash? But I'm like, I think there's still some melt up room. And even if there isn't, I know it'll rebound fast.
I just think people need to understand, so for me, I'm a huge advocate for hard assets, for sound money. So you have the financial system, right? Those are the financial assets. Those are the stocks, the bonds, et cetera, right? And as they're continuing to print more fake counterfeit money, it's going to push people to want to have more hard, real things. So commodities, gold, like real things. So I don't want this fake money. I want the real things. And so there's a distinction between that. I think that I'm personally moving my assets into hard, real things, the gold, the silver, the Bitcoin, and less of the fake financial things.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. It's been 90 minutes too. So I know you're a busy guy, so I don't want to, I mean, you tell me, when you got to go. I mean, obviously you're a wealth of knowledge and you could easily do it.
Yeah, we could sit here all day, and maybe better we just kind of have a follow up at some point if you want.
Yeah, that's what I think would be awesome. Doug Casey, Rick Rule, and a couple others that are just the most amazing conversations, and you're one of them. I've been trying to have them on once a month. So I mean, it'd be nice to reconvene when things happen a little more and hear how, from the macro strategy and the digital currencies and pushing these out and the lockdowns as things kind of progress and the election progresses. It'd be really interesting to hear an update on the way you're thinking about all the different forces that are, so many forces happening at once. So
there's a lot of forces happening at once, and that's why we have to tactically manage these things, because things are changing really, really fast, and we have to be kind of quick on our toes, so to speak. And I'm not talking about trading. I'm not talking about being a day trader, but we need to be aware of what's happening, and we have to be ready to pivot quick.
So I'll kind of wrap it up. Let me ask you, true or false, do you think in 2021 they roll out a digital currency?
I would say yes. I think potentially before Q2.
And when that occurs, do you believe that they would outlaw cash, or they would just have this digital thing available and they'd slowly be phasing it in, or what?
I think it's a slow thing. They phase it in over time. I don't think they can do it real quick like that. It'll be a slow thing. I think it'll first probably start with stimulus. So you want your $1,200, download the app. It'll start with stimulus. Then they'll start to market it and push it. And then at some point they will probably force people into it. And that could be done, one, through just switching over their savings into it. It might be done through bank failures. And then to get your FDIC insurance, you have to download the app.
That would be nuts.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to squeeze out the banks, right? They're trying to get rid of that stack. I already kind of talked about that.
Right.
So they're trying to get rid of that stack. So if you think about, like, banking's kind of decentralized. So if you understand the way the financial systems work, the banks are the ones that create the money, not the Central Reserve. So the Federal Reserve doesn't create the money. They put the reserves into the banks. The banks create the money by creating loans.
Right.
And so when I have a local bank, I can go to them and say, "Hey, local banker, I want to start this business here, providing avocados, and here's my plan." And that local banker can say, "Hey, Mark, nobody wants avocados in this market. Like, that's going to be a horrible business. I'm not going to loan on that." Right? He knows my market. He knows me. He knows the area, and he can decide. But what they're trying to do is get rid of all the local bankers and then take it to more like big commercial bankers, and then eventually get rid of them. But the bankers are the ones that create the money. But when you don't have this decentralized bank, you only have it run by a couple big banks. Well, how do they know these individual markets? How does so that changes the whole dynamic. It takes the decentralization away and it centralizes it all at the top. But that's how. So I'd see that. So they're getting rid of the banks. So anyway, that's how I'd see it. I think at first it's stimulus. Second, they market and push it. Third, banks start failing and they start providing it through FDIC.
Jeez. All right. So true, false. Gold, silver, mining stocks, and Bitcoin at the end of this time next year, their prices will be higher than they are right now.
I would say yes, double.
Double. All right.
I mean more than double, but yeah.
Last but not least, what I always like to end this way, especially sometimes talking about, heavy topics. What are you most grateful for in your life right now, when you think about your life, or most excited about in your life?
Oh boy, that's a big one. I'm grateful for so many things. I think that the way we stay happy in life is to focus on all the good things that we have and not get stuck in things we don't have or things we wish were different. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that. The thing I'm most grateful for. Shoot, I don't know. My health, maybe. My family, probably my family. I guess I would say, you know what, because a lot of what I have really comes from my family. So I'll probably have to say that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everyone listening. Hit the like button on either side. Leave a comment down below if you enjoyed this and you got some questions for Mark next time, or let us know if you thought this was a fun interview. I'm going to put the links
Before we sign it off, let me end with one thing. Before we sign it off,
please.
So I know we talked about a lot of different subjects. A lot of them being some doom and gloom. I get comments on my own channel quite a bit that I talk too much doom and gloom. Unfortunately, I'm just reporting the news. But let me just say, like I kind of started before, the future is not written for us. The future is for us to create. All right. We are not victims in this world. We create what we want. And so rather than being afraid of all these things happening, being afraid the governments are going to lock you down, being afraid they're going to make Bitcoin illegal, being afraid whatever they're going to do, instead of that, work to push your future, work to push your will, right? Remember that the government is for the people, by the people, right? 12 people in a room or 20 people in Davos cannot control the world. And so through our own education, through sharing knowledge and information, through discussion, we can have the world that we want. Don't fall victim and be worries me. Let's be proactive.
Amen. That was freaking amazing. This was a great interview. I really appreciate you stopping and ending that way. For everyone listening too, I'll put the links to all of Mark's, to his courses, his newsletter and everything, so you can check all that out. If you're not already on it or familiar with it, I'll put all Mark's links down below. And that was an amazing way to end. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. This was a fantastic interview. It was really inspiring.